to prepare a grand wedding for Willow. I booked the most expensive hotel in the city, the Blue Sky Hotel. I hired the best wedding planning team. I sent out wedding invitations to all our relatives and friends. And yet, on the night before the wedding, she secretly met her ex. After coming back, she decided to call off the marriage for the sake of love. You think I would be furious? Wrong. You think I would cancel the wedding? Absolutely wrong. Under the shocked gazes of everyone present, I said each word slowly and clearly. The wedding continues. Chapter 1. George, let's cancel the wedding. Willow's voice wasn't loud. It even carried a faint, barely noticeable tremble. Yet it cut through everything with piercing clarity. It was like a needle dipped in ice, stabbing precisely into my eardrum and instantly freezing the composed smile I had maintained all morning, the proper smile of a groom. Time, 11:07 a.m. Location, the largest Galaxy ballroom of the most expensive Blue Sky Hotel in the city. The air still carried the slightly intoxicating sweetness of the champagne tower, mixed with the crisp scent of fresh lilies and expensive cedarwood decorations. Massive crystal chandeliers refracted dazzling light, illuminating the entire hall as bright as day, and also exposing, in perfect detail, the frozen expressions on hundreds of guests below: shock, disbelief, curiosity, and anticipation for drama. Silence, absolute silence. Even the string quartet playing the wedding march seemed to have been paused. The last note hung awkwardly in midair, neither rising nor falling. I stood at the end of the red carpet, only 3 steps away from Willow. I wore a perfectly tailored black suit, with a bright red boutonniere pinned to my chest. In my hand, I still held the small velvet ring box, its edges pressing painfully into my palm. I looked at her, my bride. Willow was beautiful. Her custom ivory white wedding dress, layered with delicate lace and a trailing veil, made her look like a lily just blooming in morning dew. But at this moment, that lily was pale, completely drained of color. Beneath her carefully done eye makeup, the eyes that always held gentle warmth were now filled with panic, guilt, and a desperate, all-or-nothing resolve. Her slender fingers clutched tightly at the front of my suit, the tips turning white from the force, as if it were her only support. "What did you say?" I asked. My voice was flat, so flat it had no trace of emotion, like the surface of a frozen lake. I even tilted my head slightly, as if I hadn't heard clearly, or as if I needed time to confirm this absurd line. Willow took a breath. I said, "Cancel the wedding." Her voice rose slightly, sharp with desperation, echoing clearly through the pin-drop silence of the hall. "George, I'm sorry. I can't marry you." "What?" The brief silence shattered completely. Like a massive stone crashing into a frozen lake, a huge wave of noise exploded throughout the ballroom. "Oh my God, what's going on? Did I hear that right? The bride is calling off the wedding. Right here, at the ceremony. Is she insane? The Wong family is completely humiliated now. Look at George's face. What's wrong with that woman? Has she lost her mind? Heh, this is going to be entertaining." Voices, gasps, and murmurs tangled together, buzzing like a swarm of disturbed wasps. Countless eyes, some shocked, some disdainful, some sympathetic, some simply eager for drama, locked onto the couple at the center of the red carpet, who were supposed to become husband and wife but were now caught in the eye of a storm. My parents sat at the main table. The color drained instantly from my mother's face. She clutched her chest and swayed, barely supported by my father, whose face had also turned ashen. Willow's parents looked utterly horrified. Her mother opened her mouth as if to call her name, but no sound came out. The host, a seasoned professional, was completely stunned. The microphone in his hand nearly dropped to the floor. He opened his mouth, trying to say something to control the situation, only to find his throat too dry to produce any sound. But my gaze, it was as if drawn by a magnet, firmly fixed on Willow, more precisely, on the spot just below the slightly open neckline of her wedding dress, near her delicate collarbone. There, on her pale skin, was a faint dark red mark. Its shape was suggestive, its edges blurred, like something that had been left not long ago by forceful sucking. Not a mosquito bite, not an allergy. I knew exactly what it was. A cold, metallic taste surged up my throat. My fingers tightened around the ring box, and with excessive force, my knuckles let out a faint crack, turning a terrifying pale shade. Chapter 2. 2 days earlier. "George, you free this weekend? Come out for a drink, I'll throw you one last bachelor party." My buddy David's booming voice exploded from my phone. I was standing in front of the mirror, tying my tie, a smile lingering at the corner of my lips. In the reflection, my face looked radiant and full of life. The wedding was just 3 days away. Everything was so perfect it felt unreal. "Get lost." I laughed into the phone. "What, last bachelor? I'm only getting married once in this lifetime. I'm busy. I've got to go with Willow to finalize the last alterations on her wedding dress." "Oh wow, already under your wife's thumb," David howled on the other end. All right, we get it, you're a model husband. But seriously, We're all happy for you. Willow's such a great girl. You lucky bastard really hit the jackpot. That's right. I didn't bother being modest. My tone was full of pride and satisfaction. Willow and I had been together for 2 years. From the moment I first met her, I knew she was the one. She was gentle, considerate, and when she smiled, her eyes curved like crescent moons. She was someone I wanted to cherish in my hands for the rest of my life. After hanging up, I grabbed my car keys, ready to head out and pick Willow up. My phone buzzed again. It was a message from Willow. Hubby, my best college friend Maria just came back suddenly. She asked me out for coffee this afternoon. We haven't seen each other in ages. Without thinking, I quickly typed back, sure, go ahead. Have fun. Want me to drive you? No need. I'll drive myself. We're meeting at that Jasmine Cafe downtown. All right. Be careful. What do you want for dinner tonight? I'll cook. Anything you make is fine. Love you. I stared at the little heart emoji on the screen, and my chest softened completely. I set down my phone, picked up my keys, and walked out, humming a tune. The afternoon sunlight was perfect. After finishing up some minor work at the company, I checked the time. Still early. I figured Willow and Maria were probably wrapping up their chat, so I drove to the area near the Jasmine Cafe, planning to pick her up and head home together. I parked across the street in an inconspicuous temporary spot, turned off the engine, rolled down the window, and lit a cigarette. My gaze drifted casually toward the cafe's floor-to-ceiling windows, and then I saw Willow. She sat by the window, turned slightly sideways. The person sitting across from her was not Maria. It was a man. He wore a well-tailored light gray casual suit, his hair meticulously styled. His profile was striking, carrying a kind of composed confidence and a faint, almost careless sense of superiority that felt completely unfamiliar to me. I knew him, or rather, I knew who he was. Makoto, Willow's so-called legendary ex from her college days. I had seen his photos in her old albums, and I had heard his name in the occasional nostalgic story she mentioned about her university life. Apparently, they had lost contact when he went abroad. My heart sank without warning. My fingers froze around the cigarette, ash crumbling silently onto my pants. I saw Willow smiling, not the gentle, reserved smile she always showed me, but something more relaxed, brighter, even tinged with a girlish excitement. Her eyes sparkled as she looked intently at the man across from her, her fingers unconsciously stirring the spoon in her coffee cup. I saw Makoto say something. Willow lowered her head slightly, and a faint blush seemed to rise on her cheeks. Then I saw Makoto lift his hand and, with natural ease, tuck a loose strand of hair behind Willow's ear. Willow didn't dodge. Chapter 3. I sat in the car, separated from them by a street and a thick layer of glass. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but those subtle movements, those expressions, they were like countless icy needles, piercing relentlessly into my eyes. I took a sharp drag of my cigarette. The harsh smoke burned into my lungs, triggering a violent cough. I crushed the cigarette out, started the engine, and the tires screeched against the ground as I made a sharp U-turn and drove away. I didn't go home. The car wandered aimlessly through the city. The windows were wide open, and the early autumn wind rushed in, carrying a chill, but it couldn't dispel the heat in my chest, nor the cold panic surging within me. It was past 7 in the evening when Willow finally came back. When she opened the door, her face still carried a faint, lingering flush of ease and happiness. You're back. I sat on the sofa, holding a magazine, not even looking up. My voice was calm, so calm that nothing seemed out of place. Willow changed her shoes and walked over lightly, carrying with her a faint scent of coffee and a trace of something else, a crisp, unfamiliar men's cologne that didn't belong to her. She leaned down from behind, wrapping her arms around my neck, pressing her face affectionately against my cheek. Been waiting long. I had such a great time chatting with Maria. I lost track of time. My body stiffened almost imperceptibly. I closed the magazine, turned my head, and looked at her smiling face up close. Her eyes were bright, carrying that same sparkle I had been replaying in my mind all afternoon, the one she only had when facing Makoto. What were you talking about that made you so happy? I asked. My voice remained steady, even tinged with a hint of amusement. Oh, just girl stuff, gossip, reminiscing about college. Willow's gaze flickered slightly, avoiding my eyes. She let go of me, straightened up, and said, you must be hungry. I'll go heat up the food. She turned and walked toward the kitchen, her steps light like a butterfly. My gaze followed her back, settling on her slender neck, smooth, pale. There was nothing there. I slowly leaned back against the sofa and closed my eyes. The scene from the cafe window that afternoon, the way Makoto tucked her hair behind her ear, the faint blush on her cheeks, and the unfamiliar scent on her now, spun wildly in my mind like a carousel. I clenched my fists tightly, my nails digging deep into my palms. A voice deep inside me screamed, Makoto. It was Makoto. The person she met this afternoon wasn't Maria at all. But I didn't ask. I was afraid that the answer, already on the verge of breaking through, would completely tear apart the illusion of calm and happiness before me. The wedding was just 3 days away. Invitations had been sent out. All our relatives and friends had been notified. The hotel, the wedding arrangements, the attire, everything was ready. I couldn't ask. I didn't dare to ask. All I could do was choose to believe her, to believe what she said, that she had a great time chatting with Maria. Like a coward, I buried all my doubts, unease, and that cold, creeping panic deep in the darkest corner of my heart. I told myself it was just old classmates catching up. That was all. Willow loved me. I was the one she was going to marry. Until this moment. Until now, on this red carpet. What should have been the happiest moment of my life, my bride, wearing the wedding dress I personally chose, clutching my suit, stood before all our relatives and friends and told me, clearly, the wedding is cancelled. And beneath her collarbone, that glaring, fresh mark, belonging to another man, burned into my vision like a red-hot brand. Scorching through the last shred of self-deception I had left, my gaze finally moved away from that mark and returned to Willow's pale, resolute face. The last trace of a smile on my face disappeared completely, leaving behind only a bottomless, icy calm. Slowly, one finger at a time, I pried open Willow's hand that was clutching my suit. The motion was slow, but carried an undeniable, chilling force. Her fingers were forced apart, falling weakly to her side. She looked into my cold eyes, her body trembling slightly. Her lips moved, as if she wanted to explain something. I didn't give her the chance. I leaned in slightly, close to her ear. My voice dropped low, cold breath brushing against her ear, carrying a poisonous chill as it slipped clearly into her hearing. Willow Lou. I called her full name. Each word fell like beads of ice hitting the ground. That thing on your neck, was it Makoto who left that mark on you? Chapter 4. Willow's body trembled violently, as if struck by lightning. The last trace of color drained from her face in an instant, leaving behind a deathly pallor. Her eyes widened in terror, and she instinctively raised her hand to cover the spot beneath her collarbone. Her lips quivered, but not a single word came out. I straightened up and stopped looking at her. I turned around and faced the audience below, the crowd that had fallen into silence before once again erupting into restless murmurs, filled with countless complicated gazes. I even raised my hand to adjust my slightly crooked bow tie, which had been disturbed during the earlier struggle. The movement was calm, almost carrying a strange kind of elegance. Then, I lifted my head and swept my gaze across the entire hall, and slowly, very slowly, a smile spread across my face again. It was faint, cold, completely devoid of warmth, like a crack splitting across a frozen tundra. I picked up the microphone the host had dropped to the side, my fingers brushing against its cold metallic surface. Everyone. My voice echoed through the entire hall via the microphone, clear, steady, and carrying a strange, chilling calm. I'm sorry for letting you witness such a spectacle. I paused, my gaze sweeping across the crowd again, passing over my parents' pained expressions, over Willow's parents' shame-stricken faces, over the worried and furious looks of my close friends like David, and finally, it landed on a figure in the corner who had just stood up, seemingly trying to slip away unnoticed. Makoto, the man in the light gray suit, exuding confidence, yet now his face carried a trace of shock and poorly concealed embarrassment. He probably hadn't expected Willow to make such a decisive move right here at the wedding. My gaze, like a blade dipped in ice, fixed precisely on him. It seems. My voice rang out again through the microphone, cold and openly mocking. That today's wedding is destined to become an unforgettable farce. My fingers tightened around the microphone, the knuckles turning pale once more from the force. The hard edges of the ring box dug deep into my palm, sending a sharp pain through me, and that pain, strangely, cooled my chaotic, boiling mind in an instant, leaving it crystal clear. I looked at Makoto, at the man who had left his mark on my fiancée, at the man who had ruined the most important day of my life. The cold smile at the corner of my lips deepened, becoming sharper and unmistakably clear. But it doesn't matter. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried a decisive force, echoing clearly through the now completely silent hall. The real show is only just beginning. Chapter 5. Soft jazz music flowed through the Jasmine Cafe, while the air carried the rich aroma of roasted coffee beans mixed with the sweetness of desserts. Sunlight streamed in through the large floor-to-ceiling windows, casting warm patches of light across the polished tables. Willow sat by the window, her fingers unconsciously tracing the warm surface of her coffee cup. Across from her, Makoto leaned back comfortably against the soft sofa chair. His light gray suit accentuated his broad shoulders, and a faint smile lingered at the corner of his lips. His gaze rested on Willow's face, filled with undisguised admiration, the kind that came from a long-awaited reunion. I never thought I'd see you again, Makoto said, his voice low and smooth, like the deep tone of a cello. Willow, you haven't changed at all. You're still impossible to look away from. He paused deliberately, letting his gaze linger on her face. Willow's heart skipped a beat. A faint warmth crept up her cheeks, and she instinctively avoided his overly direct stare. "You've changed quite a bit," she replied, taking a sip of her coffee to hide her unease. "You're more mature now." "Really?" Makoto chuckled softly, leaning slightly forward, closing the distance between them. "After struggling abroad for a few years, I'd better have improved a little." Then his tone shifted, his eyes growing deeper. "But some things are carved into your bones. They don't change." He looked straight at her. "For example, how I feel when I see you." Willow tightened her grip on the cup. That was too ambiguous. She lowered her gaze, staring at the dark liquid in her cup. "Makoto, don't joke like that." I'm getting married soon." "I know," he replied calmly. "I received the invitation." He picked up his coffee, his long fingers clearly defined along the cup. It was a very elegant invitation. The groom, George Wang. Right, not a bad name. The indifference in his tone, almost like a detached evaluation, made Willow feel inexplicably uneasy. She had expected him to say something, even just a simple "congratulations," or perhaps show a trace of regret, but he didn't. He simply looked at her with a gaze that felt almost appraising, like he was assessing something that once belonged to him and was about to pass into someone else's hands. Makoto set his cup down and asked casually, "Does he treat you well?" "Yes, very well," Willow answered quickly, almost as if she needed to prove something. "We've been together for 2 years. He's considerate and very tolerant of me." "That's good." Makoto's expression remained perfectly composed and gentle as ever. He nodded slightly. "It's not easy to find someone who treats you well." He paused, his gaze falling onto the delicate engagement ring on Willow's ring finger. The diamond sparkled sharply under the sunlight. "Looks like he really treasures you." Willow instinctively covered the ring with her other hand. Makoto's tone sounded gentle, even like a blessing, but his gaze felt like needles, making her fingers burn. For a moment, she regretted coming to this meeting. Maria had suddenly been unable to make it, and for some reason, instead of leaving immediately, she had stayed, sitting here, facing the men who had once left such a deep mark on her youth. "And you?" Willow tried to change the subject, her voice slightly dry. "How have things been, abroad? And this time you came back?" "Handling some family business," Makoto replied, "and also, seeing some old friends." His gaze returned to Willow's face, carrying a knowing clarity. "And seeing you." His voice softened, brushing against her ears like a feather. "After all, once I leave this time, it might be years again, or maybe I'll never come back." Willow's heart sank suddenly. She looked up at him. "Never come back?" Makoto nodded, a trace of distant melancholy appearing in his eyes, perfectly measured. "My career there is just getting started. The foundation isn't stable yet. Even this trip back was squeezed into my schedule. Next time, who knows when it'll be." He let out a soft sigh. The sound was light, but it hit Willow's heart heavily. "Sometimes I think," he said quietly, "life is full of regrets. Some things, some people, once you miss them, you might lose them for a lifetime." Chapter 6. Makoto said nothing more. He simply looked at her quietly. Sunlight fell into his deep eyes, reflecting an emotion too complex to read. Even the music flowing through the cafe seemed to fade into the distance. Willow's heart was beating fast. A mix of bitterness, unwillingness, and a certain hidden impulse churned inside her chest. Once missed, was it really gone for a lifetime? Between her and him, those unspoken feelings, that abruptly ended youth, those fleeting shadows that occasionally surfaced in the quiet of the night, were they really to be buried completely in their separate lives, never to intersect again? "Willow," Makoto's voice sounded again, deliberately softened, low and gentle. "After tomorrow, you'll become someone else's bride." He reached out, his fingertips lightly brushing across the back of Willow's hand resting on the table. The contact was fleeting, so quick it almost felt like an illusion, yet it left behind a burning warmth. "After that, we won't be able to meet like this alone anymore." His fingertips were cool, but the moment they touched her skin, Willow felt as if an electric current had shot through her. She jerked her hand back instinctively. She looked up in panic, and met his unfathomably deep gaze. What was in those eyes? Regret, reluctance, or a silent invitation? Willow opened her mouth, but her throat tightened. Her mind was in chaos. Her reason was screaming at her to leave immediately, but her body felt nailed to the chair. That sentence, "We won't be able to meet like this alone anymore," echoed in her mind like a spell. Makoto watched her flustered reaction, a faint curve forming at the corner of his lips, a subtle smile of control. "I know this is presumptuous," he said calmly, "but I just wanted to take a good look at you before saying goodbye for good." He picked up the car keys on the table. A discreet yet luxurious brand logo flickered faintly between his fingers. "I'm staying at the Grand Hyatt, in a top-floor suite. The view is great." He paused slightly, his gaze deliberately drifting over the ring on Willow's finger. "Tonight, if you're free, or if you just want a quiet place to stay for a while, you can come anytime." He added, almost casually, "Think of it as a final goodbye with an old friend." He emphasized the words final goodbye, the implication unmistakable. He then placed the car keys back onto the table. The cold metallic surface glinted under the sunlight. Willow's eyes were drawn uncontrollably to that set of keys. Her heart pounded wildly in her chest, as if it might break through her ribs. The Grand Hyatt, the top-floor suite, the final goodbye. I have to go. Willow suddenly stood up. The movement was too abrupt, knocking over the spoon on the table with a sharp clatter. She didn't even dare look into Makoto's eyes again. Grabbing her bag, she fled in near panic. Goodbye, Makoto. She hurried out of the cafe. The cool early autumn breeze brushed against her burning face. Yet it did nothing to calm the storm raging inside her. Makoto's final words. That set of keys on the table, they were like red-hot brands, deeply etched into her mind. She got into her car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Her knuckles turned white from the force. In the rearview mirror, her flushed face and panicked eyes were clearly reflected. Her phone vibrated inside her bag. It was a message from George. Did you have a good time chatting with your friend? What do you want for dinner? I'll cook for you. Looking at the line filled with care and affection, Willow felt as if an invisible hand had gripped her heart tightly, squeezing until she could barely breathe. Guilt surged over her like an icy tide. How could she even think like this? She was about to become George's wife. Taking a deep breath, she typed a reply with trembling fingers. Finished chatting. It was fun. I want to eat your sweet and sour ribs tonight. After sending it, she collapsed weakly into the driver's seat, as if all her strength had been drained. She closed her eyes, trying to drive away the image of Makoto and his dangerously tempting words from her mind. But that phrase, final goodbye, and that cold set of car keys, clung to her thoughts like something that refused to let go, growing stronger, clearer, more tempting with every passing second. Was it really the last goodbye? Chapter 7. The night before the wedding. Willow sat in front of the dressing table. In the mirror was a face with delicate makeup, yet unable to hide its exhaustion. Tomorrow was the wedding. Beneath the grand crystal chandelier, she would wear the most beautiful gown and walk toward the men who loved her deeply. This should have been the happiest, most anticipated moment of her life, but her heart felt like it was being slowly roasted over a low flame, restless, tormented, filled with an indescribable panic, and a nearly self-destructive impulse. Makoto's face, his voice, the sensation of his fingertips brushing against the back of her hand, and that phrase, final goodbye, they circled in her mind like a spell all day, impossible to shake off. She tried to numb herself with busyness, checking the guest list, inspecting the dress, making final confirmations with the wedding planners, but no matter what she did, that thought lingered like a shadow. Her phone screen lit up. It was a message from Makoto. No text, just a photo. The photo was taken from the floor-to-ceiling window of the Grand Hyatt's top-floor suite. Under the night sky, the city lights shimmered brilliantly, flowing like a vast river of stars. The window reflected part of the luxurious interior, a large bed draped in dark velvet, barely visible at the edge. No words were needed, yet it was more powerful than any message. Those dazzling lights, that luxurious space, that silent invitation. It felt like an invisible hand gripping Willow's heart tightly. She suddenly covered her mouth. Her stomach churned violently, nausea rising to her throat. She rushed into the bathroom and retched over the toilet, tears spilling uncontrollably, not from physical discomfort, but from the immense, tearing pain inside her, and the fear of falling into an abyss. She knew she shouldn't go. One wrong step would lead to countless more. She loved George. She wanted this wedding. She wanted that stable, happy future. But what about Makoto? The man who had left the deepest mark on her youth. The man who was about to disappear from her life forever. That word, farewell forever, was like a dull blade, sawing again and again at her fragile nerves. Willow, what's wrong? Are you not feeling well? George's concerned voice came from outside the door, accompanied by a knock. Willow hurriedly turned on the faucet, splashing cold water onto her face, trying to hide the traces of tears. I'm fine. She raised her voice, forcing it to sound steady. Maybe, just a bit nervous. My stomach feels off. Do you want some medicine? Or should I get you some hot water? George's voice was full of worry. No, really, no. Willow almost shouted, a sharpness creeping into her tone that she didn't even notice. I'll just wash my face. You should go to bed. We have to get up early tomorrow. There was a brief silence outside the door. All right, Willow, get some rest. Don't be too nervous. George's voice lowered slightly, carrying a hint of disappointment. As his footsteps faded away, Willow leaned against the cold tiled wall and slowly slid down to the floor. The chill seeped through her thin nightclothes, but it couldn't cool the burning inside her. She looked at herself in the mirror, swollen red eyes, a hollow, lost expression. She felt like a stranger to herself, and hated what she saw. Her phone vibrated again. Still Makoto. This time, it was a text message. Watching the city at night alone feels a bit lonely. Maybe, it's also waiting for a farewell. That word, farewell, became the final straw. It crushed the fragile dam of Willow's crumbling rationality, and the massive whirlpool called regret and unwillingness finally swallowed her whole. Chapter 8. She suddenly stood up. The last trace of struggle in her eyes was replaced by a nearly frenzied resolve. She couldn't marry George with this regret weighing on her heart. She had to go. She had to see Makoto, to make a final break, to bury those unspoken words, those unresolved emotions, completely in this very night. Only then could she walk cleanly, without distraction, toward tomorrow's wedding, toward George. As if possessed, she quickly changed out of her pajamas and slipped into an inconspicuous black dress. She didn't put on makeup, her face bare and pale. Grabbing her bag and car keys, she moved like a thief, holding her breath as she carefully, silently opened the bedroom door. The living room was pitch dark. Only a faint light seeped through the crack beneath George's bedroom door. He wasn't asleep yet. Willow's heart leapt into her throat. Every step she took was filled with dread. Terrified of making even the slightest noise, she could hear her own heartbeat pounding wildly in her chest, deafening. Finally, she reached the front door. The cold metal handle felt icy in her hand. She took a deep breath and, using all her strength, slowly, so slowly, turned it. The faint creak of the hinge was barely audible, yet in the silent night, it sounded like thunder. She slipped out and gently closed the door behind her, cutting herself off from that warm home filled with George's presence. The cold air of the hallway rushed toward her, making her shiver. She hurried to the elevator and pressed the down button. The doors opened. No one was inside. The harsh white light illuminated her pale face, making her look like a wandering ghost. She got into her car and started the engine. The car left the underground garage and merged into the sparse late-night traffic. Neon lights streaked past the windows, dazzling and distorted, reflecting in her hollow eyes. She didn't even know how she drove all the way to the Grand Hyatt. A valet approached. She handed over the keys mechanically, like a puppet with its strings pulled. The elevator went straight to the top floor. The hallway was carpeted thickly, her footsteps completely silent. She stood before the heavy door marked with the room number. Raising her hand, her fingers trembling violently, the doorbell button was right there. Yet it felt as if it were miles away. Should she really go in? If she did, there would be no turning back. George's face, his gentle smile, the way he awkwardly cooked sweet and sour ribs for her, the way his palms sweated nervously when he proposed. Scene after scene flashed before her eyes, each one like a red-hot blade cutting into her heart. No, she couldn't. She suddenly turned, about to run away. At that very moment, the heavy door in front of her opened silently inward. Makoto stood inside. He had changed into a dark silk robe, the collar slightly open, revealing part of his firm chest. His hair was still slightly damp, as if he had just showered, carrying a fresh, clean scent. He looked at Willow, pale, shaken, and lost. There was no surprise on his face, only a calm certainty, with a faint smile, as if everything had already been expected. "You came," he said softly, his voice low and gentle, like someone who had been waiting for a long time. He stepped aside, making space, gesturing for her to enter. Inside the door, warm lighting, expensive fragrance in the air, and beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, the breathtaking, dazzling nightscape of the city. Willow stood at the threshold, frozen like a statue. Behind her was a cold abyss filled with fear and the unknown. In front of her was a warm nest radiating a deadly allure. She looked into Makoto's deep eyes that seemed to see through everything. She looked at the confident smile on his lips. The last bit of strength she had to resist, finally drained away completely. She closed her eyes. A burning tear slid down from the corner of her eye. Then she lifted her foot, as if stepping into a nightmare she could never wake from, and took one step inside. The heavy door behind her closed slowly, silently, sealing off the world outside, and cutting off every path of retreat she had left. Chapter 9. Inside the Xinghe banquet hall, time seemed to freeze. The massive crystal chandelier cast a cold light, stretching and distorting the figures of the man and woman standing at the center of the red carpet. The faint, icy smile on my face was welded in place like a mask. I pried Willow's fingers away slowly and decisively, the motion carrying a chilling sense of ritual. When I leaned down to whisper in her ear, the way her face turned deathly pale and her instinctive move to cover her collarbone struck like a silent thunderclap in the eyes of every breathless guest. What? After a brief, suffocating silence, an even louder uproar exploded. What did he just say? A mark? What mark? Oh my God, could it be? Could the bride? Her neck. Look, Willow's covering her neck. No way. The day before the wedding. That's beyond shameless. George is too pitiful. What's the point of this wedding anymore? The whispers surged like boiling oil. Contempt, shock, sympathy, schadenfreude, every kind of gaze turned into poisoned arrows, shooting relentlessly toward Willow, who stood trembling at the center of the red carpet. She clutched just below her collarbone, her body shaking like a leaf in the autumn wind. Tears streamed uncontrollably down her face, yet she bit her lip hard. not daring to make a sound, as overwhelming shame threatened to swallow her whole. "Willow, my daughter," her mother finally cried out, stumbling forward as if to rush onto the red carpet, only to be firmly held back by Willow's father, whose face was ashen and lips trembling. "George, why you need to calm down." The host finally found his voice and hurried forward, trying to smooth things over. His voice was dry and shaking. There must be some misunderstanding. "Everyone, please calm down, calm down." He waved his arms futilely, attempting to suppress the deafening noise. I let out a cold laugh. "A misunderstanding." I straightened up, my gaze like ice spikes as it swept over the host, the sneer on my lips deepening. I no longer looked at Willow, as if she were nothing more than filthy trash to be discarded. Instead, I turned toward the audience, my eyes locking precisely onto a figure in the corner who was trying to slip away quietly. Makoto Ito. "Mr. Ito." My voice rang clearly through the microphone, dripping with undisguised mockery, echoing throughout the hall. "The show's not over yet. Why are you in such a hurry to leave?" All eyes instantly converged on Makoto. Dressed in a well-tailored dark suit, he stood tall and refined, yet now he had become the center of attention. His steps halted, and a crack appeared in his usual composure. His brows furrowed slightly as he looked at me, his gaze carrying a trace of warning and a barely noticeable hint of embarrassment. "Mr. Wong," Makoto said, his voice still relatively steady, though his usual superiority had vanished. "This is a matter between you and Miss Liu. I don't think it's appropriate for me to get involved." He tried to maintain his poise. "Not appropriate." I let out a low laugh, as if I had just heard the greatest joke in the world. The sound was cold and biting. "When you left your little souvenir on my fiancé, why didn't you think it was inappropriate?" I deliberately emphasized the word souvenir, my gaze meaningfully flicking toward the spot Willow was desperately covering. "Why you?" Makoto's expression darkened instantly, his face turning extremely unpleasant. But the next second, "George, that's enough." Willow, as if that sentence had pierced through the last shred of her dignity, suddenly lifted her head and screamed through tears, her voice sharp and distorted. "It was me. I was the one who went to him. I was the one being pathetic. It has nothing to do with him. If you want to blame someone, blame me. Stop making a scene here." "Making a scene?" I snapped my head toward her, my eyes like two red-hot blades stabbing straight into her face. The icy calm finally shattered, revealing the raging fury beneath, an inferno ready to burn everything to ashes. "Willow," I gritted my teeth. "Now you know what it means to be embarrassed. Where the hell was that shame when you climbed into his bed? Where was it when you stood here in the wedding dress I bought you, saying you wanted to call off the wedding?" Chapter 10. My voice trembled slightly from the sheer intensity of my rage. Every word was like a poisoned shard of ice, slamming viciously into Willow, and into the eardrums of every guest present. The hall fell into dead silence once more, broken only by Willow's suppressed, despairing sobs. "George, calm down, calm down." David and a few of my closest friends could no longer hold back. They rushed onto the red carpet and grabbed my arms tightly, afraid I might do something extreme. Mom, what's wrong?" My sister's cry rang out from the main table. My mother clutched her chest, her face ashen, her body going limp as she collapsed into my father's arms, clearly unable to withstand the shock and having fainted. My father supported her while glaring at me on stage, and at the woman who had ruined the wedding, with a mixture of heartbreak and fury. The situation completely spiraled out of control. Cries, gasps, attempts to mediate, and endless chatter blended into chaotic noise. "Take her away." I took a deep breath, forcibly suppressing the violence surging in my chest, and spoke hoarsely to David. Yet my eyes remained locked on Makoto, like a predator fixated on its prey. David and another friend immediately half-carried, half-dragged the nearly limp Willow toward the lounge. She looked utterly shattered, like a broken doll, letting them pull her along as tears smeared across her face. I stopped looking at the chaos below, stopped looking at my unconscious mother. Step by step, I moved forward, each stride carrying a suffocating sense of pressure, heading straight toward Makoto in the corner. The crowd instinctively parted, forming a path for me. As Makoto watched me approach, my gaze like something straight out of hell, his composure finally crumbled. He instinctively stepped back, forcing a stern tone as he barked. "George, what are you trying to do? This is a public place." "A public place?" I stopped just one step away from him. We were nearly the same height, our eyes clashing violently in midair, sparks flying. "When you were leaving your mark on my fiancé in a public place, did it ever occur to you this was a public place?" My voice was low, but every word cut like a blade, thick with a sense of bloodlust. "Why you are making baseless accusations?" Makoto's face turned livid. "Baseless?" I suddenly reached out and grabbed the front of his suit. The movement was lightning fast, the force overwhelming. Caught off guard, Makoto stumbled forward, his expensive suit wrinkling instantly under my grip. "What are you doing? Let go," he shouted, both shocked and furious, struggling to break free. "What am I doing?" I leaned in close, our noses nearly touching. The overwhelming hatred and icy killing intent in my eyes sent a chill straight through him. Makoto, listen carefully. My voice squeezed through clenched teeth, each word laced with venom. Everything you've touched, I will destroy it, piece by piece, with my own hands. I released him abruptly. The force sent him staggering back several steps before he could barely steady himself. His face flushed red and pale by turns, his carefully styled hair now disheveled, leaving him utterly humiliated. I didn't look at him again, as if even a glance would be too filthy. I turned around, my gaze sweeping across the wrecked, silent banquet hall, across my parents' pained expressions, across my friends' worried eyes, and finally landing on the tightly shut door of the lounge. I adjusted my slightly disheveled tie. That cold, almost deranged smile crept back onto my face. Host, I said, my voice not loud, yet carrying clearly through the entire hall. The shaken host looked at me blankly. I raised my hand and pointed toward the lounge. My tone was eerily calm, yet carried an unquestionable, bone-chilling command. Go, bring the bride back out. I paused. My gaze was like a frozen abyss as I spoke each word slowly, smashing them into the suffocating silence. The wedding continues. Chapter 11. The wedding continues. My voice wasn't loud, yet it struck like a thunderbolt, splitting the suffocating silence in the banquet hall. Everyone froze, unsure if they had heard correctly. The host stood there with his mouth open, eyes nearly popping out. Mr. Wong, what did you just say? I said. My gaze swept over his pale face like a cold searchlight. The wedding continues. Go bring the bride out. My tone was flat, yet carried an irresistible, almost cruel calm. But, the host stammered. His eyes instinctively darted toward the lounge, then toward the chaotic crowd below, and finally to my mother, who had just regained consciousness and was weakly leaning in my father's arms. There is no but. I cut him off. My voice suddenly turned cold, filled with unquestionable authority. Follow the process. Now, immediately. Go bring the bride. The chill in my eyes made him shudder. He didn't dare say another word and practically stumbled as he rushed toward the lounge. The uproar in the crowd surged again, even louder than before. Continue. How is this supposed to continue? Has the groom lost his mind? My God, what kind of drama is this? Does Willow even have the face to come back out? What is George trying to do? This wedding can still go on. I ignored all of it. I stood there, upright and motionless, like a cold statue. I even raised my hand and meticulously adjusted my slightly crooked cuff from the earlier scuffle. The calmness of the gesture was almost unsettling. The lounge door opened. Willow was practically carried out by David and another friend. The tear stains on her face had been hastily wiped, but her eyes were swollen like peaches. A few strands of her carefully styled hair had come loose, sticking to her sweat-dampened temples, and the hem of her wedding dress was slightly disheveled. Her head hung low, her body trembling violently. She didn't dare look at anyone, especially not at the men at the end of the red carpet, radiating a terrifying presence. The host, pale-faced, forced himself to pick up the microphone. His voice was dry, like sand scraping together. Ladies and gentlemen, there was just a small interruption. Now, the wedding ceremony will continue. Please. The bride and groom exchange rings. The music resumed, the familiar wedding march. But now, that once solemn and sacred melody sounded unbearably jarring and absurd against the deathly, eerie atmosphere. Willow was half pushed, half supported back to my side. Less than a meter separated us, yet it felt like an endless abyss lay between us. She could clearly feel the icy hatred emanating from me, along with a destructive aura so chilling it seeped into her bones. The host, trembling, handed over the ring box. Expressionless, I opened it and took out the diamond ring I had personally chosen, a symbol of eternal vows. I didn't look at Willow. My gaze rested on the ring, as if it were something mildly interesting. Miss Willow. The host's voice shook uncontrollably. Do you take Mr. George as your husband? For better or worse? I do. Willow's voice was as faint as a mosquito's buzz, thick with sobs, almost drowned out by the music. She only wanted this to end as quickly as possible. The host turned to me. Mr. George, do you take Miss Willow as your wife? For better or worse? I finally lifted my head. I didn't look at the host. I didn't look at the ring. My gaze passed over Willow's trembling shoulder like two cold beams of light, locking precisely and firmly onto Makoto, who stood by the main table below, holding a wine glass, his face dark and his expression complicated. Chapter 12. The air in the entire hall seemed to solidify. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the groom's answer. Could this bizarre ceremony really continue? The corner of my lips slowly, painfully slowly, curved upward. The smile was cold and cruel, carrying a chilling malice that made one's skin crawl. I picked up the diamond ring. My movements were slow and deliberate. Then, under the gaze of hundreds of eyes, accompanied by the absurd echo of the wedding march, I took Willow's cold, trembling left hand, still covered in a white lace glove. Willow's body jerked violently. She instinctively tried to pull her hand back, but my grip was like iron, locking her in place. She could feel the crushing force in my fingers, as if I might snap her bones at any moment. I lowered my head and looked at her hand, the one meant to symbolize purity and promise. My movements were slow, agonizingly slow, like a public execution stretched out in time. Inch by inch, I slid the cold diamond ring onto her ring finger. The icy touch of the ring felt like a venomous snake coiling around Willow's finger, sending a chill through her entire body. I do. My voice was low, steady, and carried clearly through the microphone. There wasn't a trace of emotion in it, yet it struck like a poisoned blade of ice, stabbing straight into Willow's heart, and into the hearts of everyone who heard it. I lifted my head. I didn't look at Willow. My gaze once again fell on Makoto below the stage. It was filled with naked, undisguised provocation, a declaration of war. The ceremony ended hastily in a suffocatingly eerie atmosphere. There was no kiss, no embrace, not even eye contact. The host practically fled as he announced, "Now, the bride and groom will toast the guests." The toasting felt more like a prolonged public execution. I held a wine glass, that same cold, artificial smile on my face, my arm forcefully hooked around Willow's. Like a lifeless puppet, she was dragged along behind me, moving mechanically, each step like walking on blades. Wherever we went, the guests' expressions varied: awkwardness, sympathy, contempt, curiosity, their gazes weaving into an invisible net that trapped her tightly. "Congratulations. Wishing you a lifetime together. Hope you find happiness." The blessings were dry, filled with forced politeness. I acted as if I didn't hear any of it, merely nodding mechanically, clinking glasses, and downing each drink in one gulp. My eyes scanned the crowd like a radar, searching for my target. Finally, we reached the main table. Makoto was seated there, holding a glass of red wine, his face dark enough to drip with gloom. He looked at Willow, being forcibly held by me, her spirit shattered, and at the diamond ring on her finger reflecting a cold light under the chandelier. His expression was complicated: anger, resentment, and a trace of humiliation at being disgraced in public. I stopped in front of him. "Mr. Ito." The cold smile on my face deepened. I picked up a freshly filled glass of red wine from a waiter's tray and held it out to him. "Thank you for coming. This one's to you." My voice wasn't loud, but it carried clearly to the surrounding tables. Instantly, all eyes focused on us again. The air froze. Makoto looked at the glass I offered, then at the undisguised malice in my eyes. His expression darkened further. Still, he forced himself to maintain his composure and raised his own glass, preparing for a symbolic clink. And just as the two glasses were about to touch, my wrist flicked. The motion was natural, subtle, yet incredibly precise. Splash. A full glass of deep red liquid, like blood, spilled out without warning. Not a drop missed. It poured directly onto the front of Makoto's expensive dark suit. The crimson wine spread rapidly across the fine fabric, staining it in an ugly blotch before dripping down in a pathetic mess. A few suppressed gasps sounded from nearby. Caught completely off guard, Makoto was drenched. The cold liquid soaked through his shirt, clinging unpleasantly to his skin. He staggered back a step, staring at the mess of red spreading across his chest, shock and fury exploding across his face as it flushed into a dark, livid shade. Chapter 13. George, you. He glared at me, his eyes practically spitting fire. "Oh, I'm so sorry." An expression of extreme sincerity instantly appeared on my face, my tone filled with regret. My hand slipped. "I truly apologize, Mr. Ito. Look at this." "I'm really sorry." As I spoke, I casually grabbed a few napkins from a nearby table and made a show of stepping forward to help him wipe it off. "Get lost." Makoto slapped my hand away, trembling with rage, all pretense of composure gone. "You did that on purpose." "Now that's a harsh accusation, Mr. Ito." The apology vanished from my face in an instant, replaced by a cold, mocking calm. "In front of so many witnesses, how could I possibly have done it on purpose? It was purely an accident." I shrugged, my gaze sweeping over the glaring stain on his chest, a cruel curve forming at the corner of my lips. "Just like, some accidents come so suddenly that they catch people completely off guard. Wouldn't you agree?" My pointed words were like salt rubbed brutally into the still bleeding wounds of both Makoto and Willow. "You." Makoto was on the verge of exploding, his fists clenched so tightly they cracked, veins bulging at his temples. But in a setting like this, he could only endure it. "Your clothes are stained, Mr. Ito. You should go take care of that," I offered helpfully, though my tone was laced with undisguised schadenfreude. "The restroom's over there." I pointed casually in a direction. Makoto glared at me with venomous hatred, as if he wanted to tear me apart. He took several deep breaths, forcing down the urge to lash out. Then, with a loud bang, he slammed his half-full wine glass onto the table, turned on his heel, and strode toward the restroom, his back radiating fury and humiliation. I watched him leave in disgrace, the cold smile on my face finally gaining a trace of genuine, cruel satisfaction. Retracting my gaze, I acted as if nothing had happened. I picked up another glass of wine and raised it toward the stunned guests nearby. Just a small accident. Please. Everyone, carry on. Eat and drink well. With my arm still hooked around Willow, her face ashen, her body trembling as if it might fall apart at any moment, I continued toward the next table, as though the explosive confrontation just now had been nothing more than a trivial interruption. A few minutes later, I set my glass down and murmured to one of my close friends, "Keep an eye on her." Then I straightened my tie, a near-predatory excitement flickering across my face, and began walking toward the restroom as well. The restroom on the top floor of the Grand Hyatt was decorated like a luxury lounge, spacious, softly lit, with the air filled with an expensive fragrance. Makoto stood in front of a massive marble sink, facing the mirror, his expression dark as he scrubbed at the wine stain on his chest with a wet towel. The expensive suit was completely ruined, soaked and clinging unpleasantly to his skin, making him feel disgusted and irritated. In the mirror, his face was twisted with rage. At that moment, the restroom door was pushed open. I walked in. With a casual motion, I reached back and locked the door. Click. The soft sound echoed clearly in the quiet space. Makoto froze. Through the mirror, he saw the figure behind him, like a demon stepping out of hell. He spun around abruptly, glaring at me with ferocity. "And you still dare to follow me here?" I didn't answer. I strolled calmly to the sink beside him, turned on the faucet, and began washing my hands leisurely, as if I were simply there to clean up. The sound of running water filled the room. "George, what exactly do you want?" Makoto was completely provoked by my indifference, his voice low and furious. "You splashed me with wine and humiliated me in public. Wasn't that enough?" I turned off the faucet, pulled out a paper towel, and slowly dried my hands. Then I lifted my head, my gaze finally settling on his handsome face, now twisted with anger. "Not enough." My voice was soft, yet it hit like ice beads striking the ground, sharp with bone-chilling cold. "Not even close." Chapter 14. I took 2 steps forward and stopped in front of Makoto. The distance between us was so close we could feel each other's breath. I was slightly taller than him, and now, with my eyes lowered just a little, I looked down at him from above. "Makoto." My voice dropped low, hissing like a venomous snake, each word drilling clearly into his ears. "You touched something that belongs to me." My gaze, like a cold blade, scraped slowly across his face. "I have a bad habit," I continued, the corner of my lips curling upward. Under the pale restroom lighting, that smile looked especially sinister. "Anything that belongs to me, even if I don't want it anymore, no one else gets to touch it. And if they do, they pay the price." I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice even further, laced with a chilling intimacy and malice. "Wherever you touched her, I'll destroy that part of you. For every tear she shed, I'll make you bleed a liter." The naked killing intent and madness in my eyes sent a chill racing down Makoto's spine. He instinctively stepped back half a step, bumping into the cold marble sink. "Why, you're insane. What are you trying to do? This is a society ruled by law." "A society ruled by law?" I let out a low laugh, as if I had just heard something utterly ridiculous. The sound echoed in the empty restroom, unsettling and eerie. "Relax. I'm very law-abiding. I won't lay a finger on you." I paused. My smile turned incomparably cruel, almost gleeful. "I just want to watch you. Watch everything you're so proud of, your career, your reputation, that face of yours that charms women. Watch it all crumble, piece by piece, right in front of me." I reached out, not to strike him, but as if dealing with a piece of trash, lightly brushing at the wet, sticky wine stain on his chest with my fingertips. "Just like this suit," I said lightly, though my words carried immense weight. "Once it's stained, it can never be truly clean again." I withdrew my hand and looked at his face, now pale from shock and fear. In those eyes that once held arrogance and superiority, there was now unmistakable panic. A massive, twisted, almost destructive sense of pleasure surged through me like molten lava, breaking through every restraint in my mind and flooding every cell of my body. It felt incredible, a satisfaction unlike anything I had ever experienced, greater than closing billion-dollar deals, greater than any success I had ever known. It made my blood roar. The smile on my face was no longer a cold mask. It bloomed fully now, carrying a near-maniacal, destructive brilliance. I didn't look at Makoto again, as if he were already nothing more than a corpse. I turned around and faced the spotless mirror, calmly adjusting my perfectly aligned tie and cuffs. In the reflection, my handsome yet twisted face stared back at me. In my eyes burned the blazing fire of vengeance, bright, almost blinding. I gave the reflection a deeply satisfied, exhilarated smile. Then I unlocked the restroom door and walked out without a backward glance. Behind me, Makoto stood frozen in place, staring at the glaring crimson stain on his chest in the mirror, his face pale as paper as a cold chill shot from the soles of his feet straight to his skull. Chapter 15. The farce of the wedding came to a hasty end in a suffocatingly eerie atmosphere. The guests, bursting with gossip and shock, dispersed as quickly as a receding tide, leaving behind a banquet hall in complete disarray. The massive crystal chandelier still sparkled brilliantly, yet it only illuminated scattered confetti, overturned wine glasses, and the cold remnants of a celebration that had been utterly destroyed. My parents were helped out by relatives. My mother's face was ashen, and the look she gave me before leaving was filled with heartbreak and confusion. Willow's parents, on the other hand, fled in overwhelming shame and anger, not even sparing their daughter a glance as they hurried away from the place that had stripped them of all dignity. Willow, like a rag doll with its soul torn out, was forcibly shoved into the back seat of my car by David and the others. She curled up in the corner, her wedding dress in disarray, her veil long gone, tear tracks crisscrossing her face. Her hollow eyes stared blankly at the rapidly retreating street scene outside the window. She didn't dare look at the men in the driver's seat, radiating a chilling aura. I remained silent the entire way. The car sped at a terrifying pace, the tires screeching sharply against the road. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles turned white, veins bulging on the back of my hands. In the rearview mirror, my tense jawline was reflected, along with those unfathomable eyes burning with a dark, eerie fire. The car did not return to the lovingly prepared wedding home filled with the warmth of our love nest. Instead, it drove straight to another property under my name, a top-floor duplex in a luxury apartment building in the city center. The place was cold and empty. Outside the massive floor-to-ceiling windows was a dazzling nightscape, yet it carried an inhuman chill. Get out. My voice was devoid of any warmth. Like cold metal, Willow mechanically pushed open the car door. Her high heels struck the cold marble floor, echoing hollowly. She stumbled, nearly falling. I didn't help her, didn't even turn back, and walked straight toward the elevator. The elevator rose silently. In the confined space, the only sound was Willow's suppressed, faint sobbing. I stood with my back to her, rigid and upright, like an emotionless statue. The door opened. I entered the code, and the heavy metal door slid open without a sound. I walked in without turning on the lights. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city's neon lights cast a surreal glow across the room. Take it off. My voice echoed through the empty living room, cold and emotionless. Willow trembled violently and looked up in terror. George, didn't you hear me? I slowly turned around. In the darkness, my eyes were like two cold stars, locking onto her. Take off the wedding dress I bought for you. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried an unquestionable command that sent chills down the spine. That wedding dress, a symbol of purity and vows, now represented nothing but betrayal and humiliation in my eyes. Willow's body shook uncontrollably, as if sieving sand. Overwhelming shame nearly drowned her. Trembling, she reached back to find the zipper. The cold touch of the metal made her fingertips go numb. Clumsily and with great difficulty, she pulled the zipper down bit by bit, slowly slipping out of the dress. The expensive lace and silk fell to the ground, piling at her feet like discarded, filthy trash. She was left wearing only a thin slip, shivering in the cold air, her arms tightly wrapped around herself. My gaze, like an icy searchlight, swept over her exposed skin before settling on the spot beneath her collarbone, the mark I had exposed at the wedding, now a darker shade of red. I walked toward her step by step. My leather shoes struck the polished floor with crisp, echoing taps, each one landing like a blow to Willow's heart. She backed away in terror until the cold glass of the floor-to-ceiling window pressed against her back. There was nowhere left to retreat. I stopped in front of her. My tall figure cast her entirely into shadow. I reached out, not to caress, but with cold fingertips, carrying a chilling scrutiny, and pressed hard, mercilessly, onto that mark. Chapter 16. Willow gasped sharply in pain, tears instantly spilling from her eyes. Does it hurt? I asked. My voice was right next to her ear, carrying a cruel calm. When he had you, did it hurt like this too? George, I was wrong. I was really wrong. Willow broke down completely, crying hysterically as her body slid down against the glass. Choking on her sobs, she said, I drank too much. I lost my judgment. It was just a moment of impulse. I regret it. Please forgive me. Please. Forgive you. I let out a low laugh, as if I had just heard the most absurd joke. The laughter echoed through the empty room, filled with mockery and coldness. Willow, tell me, how am I supposed to forgive you? I suddenly grabbed her chin, forcing her to lift her head and meet my eyes burning with hatred. The day before the wedding, you climbed into another man's bed. Then you wore the wedding dress I bought and humiliated me in front of everyone, making me, George, the laughingstock of the entire city. You tell me, how the hell am I supposed to forgive that? My voice suddenly rose, filled with thunderous rage. Every word lashed at Willow like a whip. No, it's not like that. Willow shook her head frantically, her vision blurred by tears. I just wanted to say goodbye to him. Goodbye. My knuckles cracked faintly from the force as I tightened my grip, making her jaw ache. You say goodbye by stripping naked in bed. You say goodbye by leaving behind a disgusting mark like this. Willow, do you take me for a 3-year-old? I suddenly let go, losing support. Willow collapsed limply onto the floor, the cold surface making her shiver violently. I looked down at her from above, as if staring at something utterly revolting. I took out my phone, unlocked it, opened a file, and shoved the screen right in front of her face. On the screen were several photos. One showed the reservation record of the top-floor suite at the Grand Hyatt Hotel, booked under the name Makoto. Another was a surveillance screenshot from the underground parking garage, time-stamped around 2 a.m. on the night before the wedding, showing Willow's car entering the Grand Hyatt garage. The last showed her car leaving the garage at around 6 a.m. The evidence was undeniable. Willow stared at the images, her pupils shrinking abruptly. The last trace of denial was completely drained from her. She collapsed onto the floor, left with nothing but despairing sobs. "From today on," I said, pulling back my phone. My voice returned to that cold, emotionless calm, yet it was far more chilling than the earlier rage. "You will live here without my permission. You are not to step outside this door. I will confiscate your phone. There is only one thing you need to do." I paused, looking down at the trembling woman on the floor. A cruel curve formed at the corner of my lips. "Stay alive, and keep your eyes wide open. Watch closely as that Makoto you could never truly have is crushed into dust, bit by bit, by me." After that, I didn't spare her another glance. I turned and walked toward the study. The heavy door slammed shut behind me with a bang, separating two worlds. Willow curled up on the cold floor, the wedding dress wrapped around her like a massive white shroud. Outside, the city's neon lights still glittered brilliantly, yet not a single ray could penetrate the deathly silence in her heart. She knew her hell had only just begun. Chapter 17. My revenge operated like the gears of a precision machine set into motion, cold, efficient, and utterly merciless. The first target I locked onto was Makoto's family business, which had only just begun to establish itself domestically and was still on unstable ground. Makoto's company specialized in high-end imported medical equipment distribution. The initial investment had been enormous, and they were at a critical stage, opening channels and building credibility. Drawing on the network and influence I had cultivated over many years in the local business world, I quietly began weaving an invisible web. "Director Law, about that batch of German equipment you mentioned last time, there's a slight issue with my supply channel, so I'm afraid it might be delayed." "Yes, my apologies. However, the Swiss products of the same category represented by our Wang Group are more stable in performance and more competitively priced. Perhaps you'd consider." "President Lee, I heard you're discussing a partnership with the Ito family. Just a friendly reminder, their qualifications seem to have run into a bit of trouble recently. Customs inspections have been quite strict. The risk might be higher than you think." "Director, regarding that import approval, yes, the materials submitted by the Ito family, we've reviewed them, and there seem to be some minor issues. It might require a more thorough examination." One call after another, chance encounters, seemingly well-meaning reminders that were in fact fatal blows. I didn't even need to show myself. Through a few key figures, people who owed me significant favors, I quietly disrupted or indefinitely delayed several of the major deals and projects Makoto's company had been negotiating. Makoto quickly began to feel the pressure. Clients who had been on the verge of signing suddenly became evasive. Approvals that had been promised failed to materialize. Even bank loan applications were inexplicably stalled. The company's cash flow tightened almost overnight. "Mr. Ito, the People's Hospital just informed us, their equipment procurement plan has changed. They're no longer considering us for now. Mr. Ito, Customs has notified us that last month's shipment has been selected for inspection. It's being held for re-examination, and the timeline is uncertain. Mr. Ito, the bank manager says our loan application requires a lot more supplementary materials." Bad news came one after another. Sitting in his spacious, brightly lit office, Makoto's expression grew darker by the day. He smashed the crystal ashtray on his desk, sending expensive shards of glass scattering across the floor. "Investigate. Find out who's behind this," he roared at his assistant, veins bulging at his temples. The first person he thought of was George. Who else could have both the motive and the power? Yet George's methods were impeccably clean. Every move was hidden behind layers of connections, leaving no direct evidence pointing to him. Makoto was left with a chest full of rage. Like punching into cotton, no place to land a blow. What troubled Makoto even more was that rumors about his private life, half true, half false, began quietly circulating within certain circles. They accused him of using his status to manipulate women, even hinting at involvement with married women. Though the rumors hadn't spread widely yet, they were enough to make some partners and investors who had once been optimistic about him begin to hesitate. "Makoto, I've heard his private life is a bit messy. Doesn't it involve someone else's wife? That incident at the wedding seems like there's some truth to it. Working with someone like that carries too much risk, doesn't it? If something blows up later, it could damage the company's reputation. Like creeping vines, these rumors silently coiled around the fragile business reputation Makoto had only just begun to build. He tried to clarify and defend himself, but rumors have a way of spreading faster. The more you try to dispel them, the more you explain, the darker they become. Chapter 18. At the same time, my attention extended to Willow as well. I never stepped into that top-floor apartment again, yet her life there became more unbearable than prison. All communication devices in the apartment had been cut off, and the internet was completely blocked. The vast space felt like a luxurious tomb, filled only with cold furniture and the unchanging nightscape outside the windows. Every day, a stone-faced housekeeper would arrive on schedule, deliver simple food and water, clean up, and then leave in silence, treating Willow as if she were nothing but air. Trapped in this gilded cage, Willow was completely isolated from the outside world. She didn't know what was happening beyond those walls, didn't know how her parents were doing, and knew even less about Makoto's situation. The crushing mental pressure, combined with the guilt that gnawed at her day and night, caused her to wither rapidly. She often spent entire nights sleepless, curled up by the floor-to-ceiling window in the living room, staring at the endless stream of headlights below, her eyes as lifeless as stagnant water. Sometimes, she would face the cold glass and murmur over and over, "I was wrong. George. I was really wrong," but the only response she received was endless silence. She began to suffer from severe morning sickness. At first, she thought it was just stomach distress caused by stress. But one morning, after rushing into the bathroom and vomiting until the world spun, she looked at her pale, swollen face in the mirror, and a terrifying realization struck her like lightning. Her trembling hand moved to her flat abdomen. The night before the wedding, with Makoto, there had been no protection. Overwhelming fear seized her instantly. She collapsed onto the cold tiled floor, her entire body icy. This child that should never exist, was the final straw. If George found out, she didn't dare imagine the consequences. A few days later, when the silent housekeeper came again with food, Willow lunged forward as if grabbing onto a lifeline. She clutched the woman's arm, her voice hoarse as she pleaded, "Please, help me buy something. Please, I'll pay you lots of money." The housekeeper expressionlessly pried her fingers loose, her gaze as cold as if she were looking at a madwoman. She set the food down and walked away without a word. Willow collapsed to the ground in despair. She knew she couldn't escape, and she couldn't hide it either. This cage was an execution ground carefully crafted by George. There was no way out. Meanwhile, Makoto's trouble snowballed, growing bigger and more uncontrollable. George's covert strikes were precise and deadly, and the spreading rumors only added fuel to the fire. Finally, the last straw arrived. An anonymous report accusing Makoto's company of using falsified documents to obtain import approvals and evading massive tariffs, along with carefully edited evidence suggesting improper financial relationships with multiple women, was simultaneously delivered to the tax inspection authorities, the General Administration of Customs, and the editors-in-chief of several influential financial media outlets. The report was detailed, logically structured, and clearly targeted. Although the authenticity of its core evidence remained to be verified, at such a sensitive moment, it was enough to stir up a storm. A joint task force from the Tax Bureau and Customs descended upon Makoto's company with overwhelming force. All accounts were sealed, computers confiscated, and operations halted. Panic spread throughout the company, plunging everything into chaos. Almost at the same time, several financial media outlets and major online influencers began releasing exposés in a coordinated wave. Each headline was more sensational than the last. Rising star falls, Ito medical entangled in tax evasion and smuggling scandal. Unmasking the overseas elite Makoto, illicit affairs and financial black holes behind the glamour. Wedding scandals, male lead strikes again, risking everything for another man's wife. Though the reports didn't explicitly name him, the implications were unmistakable. Makoto's name, and his company's, shot to the top of trending searches, accompanied by the glaring tag, explosive. The comment sections were completely overrun. Waves of vicious insults, doxing attempts, and malicious speculation flooded in like a tidal surge. The carefully crafted image Makoto had built over the years, a promising young talent, a polished overseas elite, collapsed overnight, replaced by labels like scumbag, fraud, and smuggler. Chapter 19. Termination letters poured in from partners. The bank's calls demanding loan repayments rang non-stop. Furious investors demanded to withdraw their funds and hold him accountable. Makoto's company, this fragile sapling that had consumed immense family resources and effort to finally take root in his homeland, withered and collapsed at a visible speed under the storm of relentless blows. Makoto locked himself in his office, the curtains drawn tight, the room in complete disarray. His expensive suit hung wrinkled on his body, his hair messy, his eye sockets sunken and bloodshot. He stared at the shocking headlines and comments on his computer screen, at the constant stream of contract terminations and payment demands flashing across his phone. A vast, icy despair swallowed him whole. It was over. Everything was over. His reputation, his career, his future, everything he had taken pride in and relied on for survival had been crushed into dust under George's precise and ruthless assault. He could almost imagine George sitting somewhere, watching his destruction with a cold smirk. George. Makoto suddenly swept everything off his desk, his computer, files, decorations, sending them crashing to the floor with a loud bang. Like a trapped beast, He roared madly in the office, his fists slamming against the hard wall, leaving streaks of blood. Gritting his teeth, he snarled, "I'll kill you. I swear I'll kill you." But after the rage came an even deeper fear. The investigations by tax authorities and customs were no joke. If those accusations were confirmed, prison would be waiting for him. He couldn't just sit and wait to die. Clutching at his last shred of hope, he tremblingly dialed Willow's number, the one he had thought George had long since discarded. He needed money, a large amount of money. He had to leave immediately. As long as he could escape, there was still a chance to survive. The phone rang for a long time. Just when Makoto was about to lose hope, it was suddenly answered. "Willow, Willow, is that you?" Makoto's voice twisted with desperation and fear. "Save me, please. Save me. George, that madman, is going to destroy me. I need money, a lot of money. Help me, for the sake of what we had. Help me this once. I'll take you with me. We'll leave this place together." On the other end of the line, silence, a long, deathly silence. "Willow, Willow, say something." Makoto's heart sank little by little. Finally, a cold, familiar voice, like something from hell, came through the receiver, carrying a faint trace of mocking amusement. "Makoto, do you need something from my ex-wife?" Boom. Makoto's mind went completely blank. It felt as if all the blood in his body had frozen. It was George. He had Willow's phone. You, Makoto stammered, his teeth chattering so badly he couldn't form a complete sentence. George cut him off, trying to run. His voice carried the cruel delight of a cat toying with a mouse. Too late. At the airport, at the docks, every exit route you can think of, someone's already there to see you off. As for money, he let out a soft chuckle. "Save it for buying cigarettes on the inside. George, you won't die a good death." Makoto howled in despair. George's voice turned icy. "Whether I die well or not, I don't know," he said after a pause. "But you, Makoto, your good days are over." The call ended cleanly, leaving behind nothing but the cold, monotonous beep. Makoto stood there, clutching the phone like a hollow clay statue stripped of all its bones. Slowly, he collapsed to the floor. Overwhelming fear and despair consumed him completely. He knew, it was over. Completely over. The inescapable net George had woven had already locked him in place. There was nowhere left to run. Chapter 20. Inside the top-floor apartment, the silence remained absolute. Willow curled up in the corner of the massive sofa in the living room. Like a startled bird, she had grown so thin she was almost unrecognizable. The oversized nightgown hung loosely on her frail body. Her face was pale to the point of translucence, her eye sockets sunken, and the once bright eyes now held nothing but emptiness and numbness. The morning sickness had become increasingly severe, and her lower abdomen had begun to show a faint swell. This life that should never have existed was like a ticking time bomb inside her, counting down relentlessly. She had no idea that the outside world had already turned upside down. No idea that Makoto was heading toward total ruin. Trapped on this isolated island of information, the only things she could feel were the deepening despair day after day, and the overwhelming fear brought by the life growing inside her. That afternoon, the door lock emitted a soft electronic sound. Willow's body jerked violently as she looked toward the door in terror. It wasn't the housekeeper bringing food, the timing was wrong. The door opened. I walked in. I was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, standing tall, my steps calm and unhurried. There was no expression on my face, my eyes calm and without ripples, as if I had merely returned to an ordinary home. But Willow felt from me an even more suffocating pressure than before, a kind of cold satisfaction after vengeance had been fulfilled and everything had settled. Her body tensed instantly, like a bow drawn to its limit. Her nails dug deeply into her palms. My gaze swept over her, pausing for a brief, almost imperceptible moment on her slightly swollen abdomen. Then I walked straight to the armchair opposite her and sat down, relaxed, as if observing an interesting exhibit. "He's finished," I said, my voice as flat as if commenting on the weather. Willow suddenly lifted her head. A flicker of confusion crossed her hollow eyes, along with a trace of faint hope she herself didn't even realize. "Makoto, what happened to him?" I continued. "His company has been sealed, assets frozen. He's suspected of smuggling and tax evasion. The evidence is solid." My tone remained completely even, like reading a dry report. "Right now, he's probably hiding in some rat hole, waiting for the police to come. Or maybe, he's already been taken in." Every word struck Willow's heart like a heavy hammer. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Makoto was finished. The man who had once seemed like a god in her eyes, crushed just like that by me. An indescribable sorrow, mixed with a bizarre sense of release and overwhelming fear, seized her all at once. "As for you," my gaze returned to her face, cold and appraising. "What are you planning to do about the thing in your belly?" Willow's body trembled violently. Instinctively, she wrapped her arms around her abdomen, staring at me in terror. No, don't. This is my child." "Your child?" I let out a cold, mocking smile, as if I had heard something ridiculous. "A bastard conceived the night before the wedding. When you climbed into another man's bed, Willow, tell me, what right does it have to live? No, it's not a bastard, it's mine. Willow screamed suddenly, like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. Tears poured uncontrollably down her face. George, I'm begging you, let it live. It's innocent. I'll do anything you say from now on. I'll devote my life to repaying you, please. Struggling, she slid off the sofa and practically crawled to my feet, clutching the hem of my pants, begging in utter desperation and humiliation. I lowered my gaze, looking at the woman at my feet, once someone I had cherished like a treasure, now reduced to something as insignificant as dust. Her tears, her pleas, they no longer stirred even the slightest ripple in my heart. There was only a cold, almost nauseating disgust. Slowly, one by one, I pried her fingers off my pant leg. The movement was unhurried, yet carried a chilling finality. Chapter 21, I said. Tomorrow at 9 in the morning. I stood up and looked down at her from above. Someone will come to pick you up. Go to the hospital and take care of what needs to be taken care of. No, I won't go. Willow let out a piercing scream and lunged forward, trying to grab my legs. George, you can't be this cruel. It's a life. I easily avoided her. My gaze was as cold as if I were looking at a corpse. You don't have a choice. Either you go yourself, or, I paused, my tone turning ominous, I'll help you go. The word help was bitten out heavily, carrying a chilling threat. Willow collapsed completely onto the ground, like a heap of mud. Overwhelming despair and fear engulfed her like an icy tide. She knew I meant every word. She couldn't protect this child. She couldn't protect anything. I didn't look at her again and turned toward the door. As I pulled it open, I paused slightly without turning back. My voice came through clearly. After it's done, take your things and get out of my house. Get out of my sight. Forever. Don't ever let me see you again. The heavy metal door shut silently behind me, cutting off Willow's desperate cries, and completely severing the last, long rotten thread between us. At 9 the next morning, right on time, there was a knock at the door. Two unfamiliar men in black suits stood outside. Expressionless, Willow, like a walking corpse, was half supported and half dragged out of the cage that had imprisoned her for days. She didn't resist. Her eyes were hollow as they stuffed her into a black sedan. The car drove to a top-tier private hospital. The environment was elegant, the service impeccable, yet the air was filled with the cold, sterile scent of disinfectant. Willow lay on the cold operating table, the glaring surgical lights blinding her. She watched the doctors and nurses, faces masked, revealing only indifferent eyes, and listened to the cold clinking of metal instruments. The anesthetic flowed into her veins, and her consciousness began to blur. In the final second before she slipped into darkness, she seemed to see George standing outside the large glass window of the operating room, watching her expressionlessly. At the corner of his lips, there seemed to be a faint, chilling smile. When Willow woke again, she was lying in a hospital room. A hollow, persistent ache pulsed from her lower abdomen. Instinctively, she reached down to touch it. The slight curve that had once been there was gone. Empty. Everything was empty. Her heart, her body, her future, everything had been completely erased along with that unwanted life. A nurse walked in and handed her a thick envelope and a document folder without expression. Miss Liu, the procedure was successful. These were left for you by Mr. Wang. Your discharge paperwork has been completed. You may leave at any time. With trembling hands, Willow took the envelope. Inside was a stack of cash. In the folder were her ID card, passport, and a divorce agreement already signed and stamped. George's name was written boldly, the strokes powerful enough to pierce through the paper. She looked at the divorce agreement, then touched her now empty abdomen. Suddenly, she broke into a silent laugh. The laughter grew louder, more unhinged, while tears streamed down like broken pearls. It was over. This absurd and brutal farce she had started with her own hands had finally come to an end, in the most complete and merciless way possible. A few days later, carrying a bag with cash and documents, Willow boarded a flight to the south alone. Like a wandering ghost, she told no one, and no one came to see her off. She chose a completely unfamiliar coastal town, somewhere without George, without Makoto, without any trace of her past. What awaited her was nothing but an empty future, and a lifetime of inescapable, bone-deep regret and pain. Chapter 22, Epilogue. I stood before the massive floor-to-ceiling window in the president's office of Wang Group. This was one of the highest vantage points in the city. Beneath my feet flowed endless streams of traffic, and pedestrians looked as small as ants. The afterglow of the setting sun painted the sky in magnificent shades of gold and crimson, casting a cold, metallic sheen over my upright figure. In my hand, I held a glass of whiskey. The amber liquid swirled gently within it. The office lights were off, leaving only the light streaming in from outside to illuminate my sharply defined profile in half light and shadow. My phone screen glowed, displaying the latest news alerts. Ito Medical's legal representative Makoto officially arrested on suspicion of major smuggling and tax evasion. Former overseas elite behind bars, business myth completely shattered. tracing Makoto's downfall, scandalous affairs intertwined with financial black holes. Below them was a photo of Makoto being taken away by the police, his hair disheveled, his face ashen, his eyes hollow. The man who once stood at the height of success was now reduced to utter disgrace. My gaze swept over the headlines and the photo. My expression unchanged. I raised the glass and took a small sip. The sharp liquid slid down my throat, leaving behind a burning sensation. I thought of Willow being dragged out of the apartment, her spirit shattered, like a walking corpse. I thought of her lying on the operating table, her eyes hollow with despair before the anesthesia took hold. I thought of the signed divorce agreement. I thought of Makoto's hysterical, fear-filled roar over the phone. Scene after scene flashed through my mind, vivid and unmistakable. There was no emptiness, not even a trace. There was only one feeling, like molten lava surging through my veins, crashing through every inch of my body before gathering in my chest and exploding outward. Exhilaration. Unprecedented exhilaration. Pure, unrestrained satisfaction. The feeling of personally crushing an enemy into dust, of casting a betrayer into hell, surpassed any business success, any accumulation of wealth. It brought me a destructive pleasure and fulfillment that came from the very depths of my soul. How long had I planned? How long had I waited? How long had I suppressed that fury and hatred? Now, every calculation, every moment of restraint, every carefully laid scheme had been repaid in the most perfect, most complete way. Makoto, ruined, imprisoned, his future obliterated. Willow, stripped of everything, body and soul shattered, exiled to a distant place, doomed to live the rest of her life under the shadow of pain and regret. And I, George, remained the victor, standing at the top of the pyramid, the one who controlled everything with the most realistic, most ruthless, and most effective methods. I had completed the most thorough reckoning and revenge. I tilted my head back and drained the rest of the whiskey in one gulp. The burning liquid scorched its way down, igniting the flame of vengeance in my chest, making it burn even more fiercely, more wildly. Facing the sky outside, stained red by the setting sun, as if it were ablaze, I slowly, clearly, allowed a smile to spread across my face. That smile was cold, sharp, like a blade drawn from its sheath, glinting with a chilling edge. It held no warmth, only a sense of total control and destructive pleasure. The golden light of the sunset reflected in my eyes, igniting two flickering flames. Victory. I had won, completely, and the unparalleled thrill of this successful revenge would linger like the finest aged whiskey, staying with me for a long, long time.